Israel is openly promising to commit war crimes in Lebanon after it repeatedly violated a ceasefire, which was already a total farce to begin with. The latest assault by Israel on southern Lebanon today has killed 6 Lebanese people. Now, Israel Katz is the current defence minister after the previous defence minister, Yoav Gallant, a wanted man by virtue of the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant for war crimes and crimes against humanity, was sacked for being too moderate. Now, he's declared that if the fictional ceasefire, as we'll discuss, collapses, then Israel will no longer differentiate between Lebanon and Hezbollah. He says if the ceasefire collapses, there will be no more exemption for the state of Lebanon. We will enforce the agreement with maximum impact and zero tolerance. If until now we have differentiated between Lebanon and Hezbollah, that will no longer be the case. Well, to be clear, it's a deceit to suggest they've been making this distinction already, having committed multiple war crimes and engaged in the mass slaughter of innocent civilians. What they're talking about here is an even more murderous onslaught, which will inevitably kill more civilians. And indeed, what they're doing here is saying either you take on, fight Hezbollah, i.e. either you have a violent civil war in Lebanon, which Lebanon's already gone through, or we will come in and we will massacre you. That's the subtext. It's not even a subtext. What the Israeli foreign minister is openly doing here is committing to war crimes. He's saying the mass death and destruction already unleashed by Israel will be escalated. War crimes are already being committed by Israel in Lebanon. So what he's saying in terms of an escalation is just overtly saying far more obscene war crimes. Now, given there were about 1 million other public statements by Israeli leaders and officials committing to perpetrating war crimes, and the media has failed to frame its coverage around those statements, let's not expect them to start doing so now. It is the Israeli state which trashed a ceasefire deal with Lebanon, which, in any case, was a farce from the start. Israel is now once again bombing southern Lebanon. As I've said, this is after a statement by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, also a wanted man by the International Criminal Court, who said Hezbollah fire at Mount Dov constitutes a severe violation of the ceasefire and Israel will respond forcefully. We are determined to continue enforcing the ceasefire and will respond to every Hezbollah violation, minor and major. Well, even CNN, a news channel which has repeatedly, I would say, regurgitated Israeli propaganda, makes clear that this Israeli claim is a nonsense. Let's just listen to this clip.
I want to be very clear, though, Dana, that there have been continuous violations since this ceasefire took effect early Wednesday morning. CNN spoke to a UN peacekeeping source who says that Israel has violated that ceasefire about 100 times. But there are many people on both sides of this border who are desperately hoping that this doesn't escalate further and that the ceasefire prevails, Dana.
Israel has violated, as CNN puts it there, the so-called ceasefire signed on the 27th of November, that's 6 days ago, 100 times, according to those observers, as CNN reports. I say so-called ceasefire because if one side violates it 100 times in a few days, that's not a ceasefire, is it? If you take the word seriously, that is, ceasefire, not to get pedantic over meanings or anything, even the US has kicked off over this. According to the Times of Israel, the US Special Envoy Amos Hochstein reportedly sent a message urging Israel to uphold the agreement. In particular, he cited Israeli drone flights over Beirut. Hebrew media cited Israeli sources as saying. Now, it should be noted, actually, this US Special Envoy himself is a veteran of the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, what he's saying there, reported in the Israeli media, is meaningless, of course, because they don't take any meaningful action against Israel, as Israel knows. It's also reported in the Israeli media that the French state, which is part of the US-led monitoring mechanism overseeing the ceasefire agreement, accused Israel specifically of 52 ceasefire violations. The absolute absurdity then of some of the headlines, for example, the Associated Press, Israeli strikes hit southern Lebanon but tense ceasefire holds. Orwellian use of language. Now, the reason the ceasefire deal was such a travesty is in large part because the ceasefire deal gave space for Israel to attack at will. Netanyahu had declared that when it was agreed, Israel would, in quotes, maintain full freedom of military action in Lebanon with the United States' full understanding, with President Biden saying the same, saying if Hezbollah or anyone else breaks the deal and poses a direct threat to Israel, then Israel retains the right to self-defense consistent with international law. Well, we've seen what this means in practice. Israel's interpretation of that means in practice being able to unleash mayhem at will and disregarding international law. Now, Israel also sent recorded messages across Lebanon forbidding Lebanese civilians from returning to their homes in the south. We've seen in the last 40 months how crimes against humanity have been repeatedly accompanied by crimes against the English language. Israeli strikes hit southern Lebanon and 10 ceasefire holds are not compatible statements. Yet when Hezbollah say they had fired a warning defensive response after such violations, that was portrayed as an aggressive attack, with the subsequent Israeli strikes instead portrayed as a response. For example, the BBC, Israel strikes Lebanon as Hezbollah targets military post. Now, according to the Lebanese authorities, Israel has killed around 4,000 people in Lebanon. That itself is more than 3 times the number of Israelis killed on 7th of October. They've begun replicating the same sorts of heinous crimes there as they committed in Gaza. For example, they have damaged nearly 10% of Lebanon's hospitals. In just over a year, up to 27th of October this year, they killed at least 175 health workers in 82 incidents in Lebanon, with explosive weapons, including plane and drone strikes, IEDs placed inside communications devices. That's according to the NGO Insecurity Insight. Now, in Gaza, of course, they've killed over 1,000 doctors and nurses. This normalisation of the destruction of healthcare, slaughtering medical staff, destroying hospitals, things you'd imagine we would previously agree are grave war crimes. Now, you can see here an ambulance being destroyed by Israeli soldiers of the 7th Brigade who posted it gleefully on their private social media accounts. This was uncovered by Younis Tarawi, a Palestinian journalist who does crucial work. He's compiled countless other examples, like Israeli soldiers joyously setting fire to Lebanese civilian homes, Israeli soldiers dressing up in the clothes of women who they've displaced or maybe even maimed or killed, turning the Yarin medical clinic in southern Lebanon into a military base, the use of hospitals for military purposes. In other words, every accusation is a confession. And then there is, for example, the relentless destruction of religious sites, some of them ancient. Let's have a look at this. This is the mausoleum of St. Peter, the Apostle of Christ, in southern Lebanon, 2,000 years old, now destroyed by Israel. It's worth noting that we sometimes hear the cheerleaders of Israel discuss how Christians are persecuted in the Middle East, only when they point the finger at Muslims, though. But Israel, of course, drove Palestinian Christians murderously so from their homes in the Nakba, which accompanied the country's foundation, and they have suffered persecution, occupation, all the rest since as well. The fact is, Israel has committed grave war crimes in Lebanon. It has promised to commit even greater war crimes. Thanks to its US patrons, it had a ceasefire rigged in its favour and then systematically broke that ceasefire. Much of the Western media will tell you otherwise, but this is the truth. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your thoughts, your comments. Check out my Substack at owenjones.news. Keep the show on the radio at patreon.com/owenjones84 so we can keep taking on these lies, myths, distortions, propaganda, all the rest. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.